On October 3rd, 2025, the interstellar object 3I Atlas will pass within a distance of 29 million kilometers from Mars. This may sound like a considerable distance, but given the enormous distances between the planets in our solar system and the utterly colossal distance between planets when interstellar space is taken into consideration, this is an extreme near miss, a close shave by anybody's standards. And what is even more significant is the fact that the minimum orbit intersection distance of 3I Atlas from Mars, namely the closest distance that 3I Atlas gets to the complete path of Mars around the Sun, is just 2.7 million kilometers. This in itself constitutes a remarkable fine-tuning of the path of 3I Atlas. To put it another way, 3I Atlas is passing less than 7 times the distance from Earth to the Moon, from the plane of the ecliptic, from the orbits of all the major planets in our solar system. That being the case, this is an object that is capable of getting a good look at several different planets in our solar system, assuming, of course, that it had the equipment on board to do so. And what if it does? What if it has the capability to get not only a close look at the planet Mars, which would be interesting to just about any extraterrestrial explorer, given the fact that Mars sits inside the Goldilocks zone of our Sun? What if these extraterrestrial explorers wanted to get an even closer look, to dispatch their equivalent of Voyager 1 and 2 to the Red Planet to see whether or not there are any settlements there, whether or not there's any evidence of current or past life, or to see whether or not the civilization on the third planet orbiting the Sun has managed to establish a colony there. If 3I Atlas were to dispatch these kinds of probes, which by the way it could very easily do even using primitive human technology, this is something that we could actually see. Well, interestingly enough, we absolutely could, because we have seen objects like this in the Martian sky before, on more than one occasion. And best of all, you and I can look for these objects in the Mars night sky without any help from NASA. And I'm going to tell all of you how we can do that in just a moment. Good afternoon, angry alien enthusiasts, and welcome to another 3I Atlas Bulletin. Once again, this object is in the news, and mainly because of where its next destination is. That is to say, the planet Mars, or rather the orbit of the planet Mars. 3I Atlas is actually crossing the orbit of Mars very, very close to the path that the planet actually takes. We're only talking about a separation of less than 3 million kilometers from the object and the orbit itself. Remarkably close indeed for this to be happening purely by chance. And now that I'm talking about all of that, I want to present all of you with a hypothetical situation. Let's say that you have made the decision to live in an extremely isolated place, let's say in the middle of the desert or at the top of a tall mountain, someplace that has no easy access, no trails, no roads. Your residence doesn't even exist on Google Maps. You've done everything you can to remove your presence from the grid, and there has been no sign of any human beings over the last 5 years. You've even checked satellite imagery to make sure that no humans have passed anywhere near you. And sure enough, you've done a pretty good job, and nobody seems to have the slightest idea that you're out here. And then one day, a rock comes flying through your window, smashes your dining room window, shall we say, and lands right on the dining room table. You pick the rock up, and it looks pretty natural, although not entirely natural. It actually kind of looks like an ingot of some kind, perhaps a piece of metal that might have been mined someplace or something along those lines. But really, none of that matters. The fact of the matter is that this rock just flew through your window, shattering it, landing straight on the table, disrupting all of your hard-earned isolation. What is your first conclusion likely to be? Once again, you have no evidence to indicate that humans have come anywhere near your residence for years. No evidence that anybody even knows anything about this place. And then all of a sudden, a rock has come smashing through your dining room window. Now, there are a few natural explanations for this phenomenon. There could have been some sort of strange downdraft, something like that, a freak weather occurrence that would be powerful enough, if it was a powerful enough gust of wind, to kick up grit and rock, and perhaps even a large enough rock to throw it through your window. Of course, you haven't heard a storm outside. There was nothing in the weather forecast to suggest that something like that could happen. But once again, freak downdrafts do occur, and they can get very powerful with forces of over 150 kilometer per hour winds, certainly powerful enough to pick up a sizable rock and to throw it through your window. That being said, would you therefore not investigate your property? Look around your property to see whether or not you could find a potential miscreant. In spite of all the effort that you've made to isolate yourself from humans, and in spite of all of the evidence that you have successfully isolated yourself, that there's no evidence that any humans have been around your property for 5 years, would you then discard the possibility that a human had thrown that rock through your window? Would you then simply ignore the possibility that there might be a trespasser on your property? Well, of course you wouldn't. Of course you would at least consider the possibility that somebody has found your residence, that somebody might potentially be a threat to you, and you might want to investigate, or at the very least, call the police. Only somebody with their head completely embedded in the sand would dismiss the possibility of a human having found your residence and then by some strange decision-making decided that vandalism was the act that they wanted to carry out. And by the way, if somebody decided to do that, they could potentially present a threat to you in the future. Only somebody who refused to accept obvious possibilities would refuse to look about their property for this miscreant. The reason I brought this scenario up to all of you is because this is what the scientific community is doing with 3I Atlas. Here we have an object, and every time we look at it, it gets stranger and stranger. So many things about this object differentiate it from run-of-the-mill comet, from comets that we see in the solar system all the time. We have yet to see a single comet in the solar system that has closely resembled 3I Atlas. Indeed, there are so many things about this object that are uncomet-like. And then to add to all of that, here is an object passing within 0.4 astronomical units, and in some cases closer than that, to 3 different planets in the solar system, to Mars, to Venus, to Jupiter, all close enough to dispatch probes to all 3 of these planets. And yet, because we have never seen an alien civilization, because we don't have any solid proof that alien civilizations exist, we refuse to accept the obvious possibility that the reason this highly unlikely event is taking place, the reason this rock is flying through our solar system and through our dining room window to come to rest on our dining room table, is because of the obvious possibility that somebody sent it here. And since it is so foolish to at least not consider the possibility, regardless of how remote that possibility might be, that this object was sent here by design, we should examine all possibilities of artificial actions that this object might take, artificial behavior that would give it away. And that is why we're talking about Mars today. Not necessarily because of the probes that are currently orbiting Mars that can observe 3I Atlas, although thank God, as you're going to find out, the European Space Agency has made the decision to point their orbiting probes towards 3I Atlas to get a better look at it. But in addition to that, Because 3I Atlas is passing so close to Mars, it's very possible that it is going to dispatch some kind of probes to investigate this planet. That would be its most obvious reason for being there, for making such a close approach. And we might be able to see these scouts, these probes, these Voyager 1 and 2 duplicates, or the alien equivalent of Voyager 1 and 2, that might be dispatched by 3I Atlas as it passes by. The question is, can we actually look for these objects as they make their approach to the planet Mars? Or if not, let's say that they make their way into the atmosphere. Might we be able to spot them? Well, yes, actually we might. Because we have seen strange objects in the Martian sky before, both from orbit and from the Curiosity rover. We've seen them before, and there's a way to look for them again. And here's the best part. We don't need NASA's cooperation. This was the second to last photograph taken by the last space probe designed by the Soviet Union, Phobos 2, a photograph of the Martian moon Phobos and something else, something that nobody has ever been able to explain, although former cosmonaut and test pilot Marina Popovich was very certain as to what the Soviet cameras on Phobos managed to photograph right before the Soviets lost control of this ill-fated spacecraft. Yes, right after this photograph was taken, control was lost of Phobos 2, which by the way had operated nominally through its entire mission and returned 36 images of Phobos before it returned this one, only to suddenly tumble out of control, but not before taking this photograph as well, a strange elongated shadow on the surface of Mars. Now, shortly after the loss of Phobos 2 in 1990, then Colonel Popovich held a press conference at the Russian consulate in San Francisco, at which she showed these photographs and claimed that they were a cigar-shaped alien craft measuring 15 miles long. And interestingly enough, even though this object is substantially larger than a Oumuamua, its general configuration is very similar, extremely elongated, casting almost a cylindrical shape on the Martian surface just south of the volcano Arsia Mons. Now, this one incident would be interesting enough, but it's not the only example of strange elongated objects being spotted in the Martian sky or in Mars orbit. For example, these series of images captured by the Curiosity rover on May the 4th of 2014 also seem to show a bright, elongated object in Mars orbit. Given the size and given the series of photographs, this cannot be anything natural, at least not a natural object that we would commonly see. For example, these are time exposure photographs taken 4 minutes apart. A meteor would come and go within seconds. There's no way it could be a meteor. Another possibility is this could be a time exposure image of Phobos or Deimos, but if that were the case, these sorts of images should be appearing on a regular basis, because this type of time exposure is used by the Curiosity rover on a regular basis, and only once has it ever picked up images like this. If it were Phobos or Deimos, this is the sort of thing we should see on a regular basis, and that would also apply to any near Mars asteroids that would make their way quickly across the Mars sky and create this time exposure streak. This is far too bright to be anything conventional in orbit around Mars, and again, its elongated shape means that it's probably not anything natural, not anything that we would commonly identify as a natural object in Mars orbit. Yet another Mars UFO that NASA won't even talk about. However, I've got some good news from ESA. Colin Frank Wilson, project scientist for ESA's Mars orbiters, just confirmed that the agency is preparing to attempt observations of the interstellar object 3I Atlas during its passage through the solar system. Quote, "We can confirm that we are planning to observe 3I Atlas around the time of its closest approach to Mars," according to Wilson. This is predicted to occur on the 3rd of October, and on this date, the object will still be approximately 30 million kilometers away from Mars. ESA will employ both Mars Express and the ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter spacecraft to make observations. Quote, "We will attempt to obtain images of the object using the high-resolution stereo camera, or HRSC, on board Mars Express, and also with the color and stereo surface imaging system, or CASIS, on board the Trace Gas Orbiter," according to Wilson. The comet will be too distant for a real close-up look. However, if 3I Atlas is bright enough, and by the way, this is Mars Express imagery taken in 2022, and in this imagery you can see a UFO appear. Did you ever hear about this news? Because I sure didn't, but sure enough, we have an unidentified flying object zooming across the Mars landscape, or whatever this might have been, a fast-moving cloud. Hard to tell what it was. But in any event, Mars Express gets some interesting imagery from time to time. But if 3I Atlas is bright enough, the HRSC may be able to hint as to whether it's elongated, spherical, or irregularly shaped. The first discovered interstellar interloper, Oumuamua, was unusually elongated and more like an asteroid. It's nice to hear somebody say that, while 2I Borisov was more like a typical comet. CASIS, meanwhile, could provide insights into 3I Atlas's volatile activity and its composition. Quote, "We will also attempt to measure the spectrum of the object using the TGO's Nomad and the Omega and Spike Cam spectrometers," according to Wilson. These payloads could tease out evidence of molecular signatures such as water vapor or organics, which, by the way, have been strangely absent so far in the spectroscopy that we have carried out of 3I Atlas's coma thus far. However, we do not have great hopes that the signal will be bright enough for spectral characterization. There are other spacecraft around Mars that could be repurposed to take advantage of the 3I Atlas close approach as well. This includes NASA's Aging Mars Atmosphere and Volatile Evolution, or MAVEN orbiter, and the Mars Reconnaissance orbiter. And China also has its Tianwen-1 orbiter, which carries a high-resolution camera comparable to that of the MRO. In other words, the two countries that could get the best look at 3I Atlas, the United States and China, have yet to announce that they're going to do a damn thing about it. Hopefully that will change sometime in the near future, but let's talk about what 3I Atlas might have in mind when it comes to observing Mars, and perhaps even our spacecraft and land-based rovers on this planet as well. We've already discussed just how close 3I Atlas is going to come from the orbital path of the red planet, the minimum orbit intersection distance. If 3I Atlas is a technological object, this short MOID makes it easy for a precursor mini-probe to reach Mars. In addition, an orbit correction of 10 to 15 kilometers per second during the month of September could shrink the closest approach distance of 3I Atlas from Mars to 0. In other words, in theory, a relatively small course correction from 3I Atlas even this late in the game could allow 3I Atlas to enter Mars orbit, or perhaps crash right into it. The ejection of icy fragments from the surface of a natural comet can only result in a velocity kick of around 0.4 kilometers per second based on the analysis of data from the Webb telescope. This ejection speed is insufficient for these fragments to reach Mars. Moreover, the extent of the CO2 plume is of an order of 350,000 kilometers, a distance beyond which the plume is expected to be confined by the ram pressure from the solar wind. In other words, the solar wind keeps the coma from getting any bigger than this, or the halo that appears to be advancing in front of Mars. This distance is still shorter by a factor of 100 from the value needed to reach Mars during the closest approach of 3I Atlas without a maneuver. Given all of these considerations, the arrival of materials from 3I Atlas to Mars in October of 2025 will be an undisputable signature of technology. Gladly, the Labor Day holiday provided Dr. Loeb with a relief from his routine administrative duties as director of Harvard's Institute for Theory and Computation. In between interviews for television and podcasts, he calculated that if 3I Atlas has a precursor probe that was traveling ahead of it and sideways towards Mars by about 30 million kilometers, then this precursor probe would be able to intercept Mars on October 3rd, 2025, or during the week preceding it. This provides a second motivation for using the HiRISE camera within a month. In addition to imaging the nucleus and dust cloud of 3I Atlas, HiRISE could image Mars in search for any precursor objects that precede 3I Atlas and get closer to Mars than the main object. Near-Earth telescopes cannot detect the reflection of sunlight from precursor objects that are smaller than 100 meters, the upper limit on the size of all space probes launched by humans thus far. So is NASA likely to use the HiRISE camera to look for these sorts of things? Probably not. But is there a way for us to do it? People who actually believe that 3I Atlas might be the product of a technologically advanced civilization? Well, yes, there is, at least if we want to make use of the Curiosity and Perseverance raw image data. The photographs captured by both Perseverance and Curiosity are readily available to the public. The raw data is published almost immediately after the data hits NASA's Deep Space Network after making its long journey from the Red Planet. It's a long shot, but it's possible that if 3I Atlas does dispatch exploratory probes to Mars, and especially if these probes are interested in any functioning technology on the surface of Mars, because keep in mind, both Perseverance and Curiosity are using decaying nuclear isotopes for power, then perhaps these probes will make a close encounter with our rovers. Granted, an outside chance, a remote possibility, but nevertheless, still something that should be explored. And I would love to recruit some of you fantastic viewers to help me look for UFOs in the Mars sky. So how does all of this sound? You guys interested? Well, if you are, then email me. Email me that you're interested in looking for any UAPs that may appear in the Martian skies in the month of October, and perhaps the last week of September as well. Sometime in that time frame, within those 5 weeks or so, let's examine the photos, the raw footage that the Curiosity and Perseverance rovers are going to be taking during that time to see whether or not we can spot anything in the sky. It's best to do this systematically, so let me know that you would like to participate, and then once we are getting ready to begin looking through the raw footage, we can coordinate amongst ourselves as to who wishes to look at what footage. It'd probably be best to have 2 people looking at the same pieces of footage just to make sure that nobody misses anything, but if this is something you're interested in doing, once again, my email is in the description, and perhaps we can organize an effort to systematically look through the Perseverance and Curiosity data to see if we can find anything. Because I guarantee you, NASA is not going to be looking for all of this. It's up to people who actually believe that 3I Atlas might be an artificial construct or an asteroid ship, something that is here by design. It is up to us to look for these things. And incidentally, I don't think that NASA is going to be going through this data with a fine-tooth comb and removing any incriminating evidence, if you will. I honestly believe that the scientific community is so dismissive of this possibility that they're not going to be looking. I doubt that anybody at NASA is going to take the time to remove this data. I think it's far more likely that if there is something there, and by the way, the odds are very, very small, that even if there are alien probes making their way through the Martian atmosphere, that they are by random chance going to pass by Perseverance or Curiosity exactly at the time that they might be taking photographs. But once again, if these are probes designed to look for anything unusual on the planet Mars, and that would of course include active probes that are using nuclear power plants to operate. They operate off of the decay of nuclear isotopes. Well, who knows? They might be very interested indeed. So it's definitely worth the effort. Once again, if you're interested in all of this, my email is in the description. Thanks very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, if you'd like to support this channel, the best way to do it is on Patreon. I'm currently recognizing all of our latest Patreon supporters. Thank you so much for adding your support to this channel. If I can get to that 0.5% of my subscribers supporting us on Patreon, I'll do a 24-hour UFO hunt from a UFO hotspot, either in Australia, the United States, someplace, without doing any fundraising to support it. You're interested in supporting all that? Again, details in the description. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, stay angry about space.